Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. So today we have the hot location Bar Sinister, and if you guys were around when Bar Sinister was released as a featured location, you know that this location creates some absolutely insane gameplay, some absolutely insane combos, just absolutely ridiculous things that you can do in this location. And so I've put together my top 5 deck recommendations to try out while this location is featured as the hot location for today. So starting off with a pull 1 build. Now in pull 1, you don't have to worry about counter cards to 1 cost drops like Killmonger or even Shang-Chi if you have a high enough power push. And so my recommendation for today for pull 1 players is to use some form of a Kazar Zoo deck build. Now, you can do a couple of really cool things with this list. You can drop a Nightcrawler into Bar Sinister. That is going to multiply him 4 times. You can move 1 out and then drop something like a Blue Marvel or a Kazar. And then you can move the rest out and drop your Onslaught for a really big high roll across all of your lanes. Now, they did in the most recent patch switch it from multiplicative to additive, and so it's not going to be as insane as it was before, but it should be absolutely enough to ensure that you win the game and all 3 locations. And so the idea behind this one is a very standard Kazar Zoo. If you get the high roll of your Onslaught, then that is what you want to lean into. Otherwise, you're going to curve your cards out as well as possible. We have Uadu in here as sometimes he's going to let us know where that location is before we start playing cards there, rather than having to skip and just hope that it shows up. But otherwise, this is a very standard pull 1 Kazar Zoo deck list, and I think it's going to serve you very, very well today. And then next up, we have our pull 2 version, and there's a lot of things you can do whenever you get to pull 2. You don't really want to lean into a Kazar Zoo as much anymore because you do have to worry about Killmongers and you have to worry about Shang-Chi's. You could drop a Nightcrawler in here as a way to kind of help protect that lane from any kind of negative downside that you might run into. Or you could even lean into like a Yondu and a Carnage and a Cable to mill the opponent's entire deck really early on. But I think this is going to be your more consistent answer. You have several options, several good targets to drop into that location. You have your standard Spectrum ongoing deck list. You can flood 1 or 2 locations with your ongoing cards, and then late in the game you can drop your Kazar, your Blue Marvel, your Spectrum, or even your Claw into that location. Claw is going to make sure that you win that one to the right, and then Spectrum, of course, is going to buff up all of your ongoing cards, and it will multiply in that lane and trigger 4 separate times for a very big power push that the opponent, if they don't have an answer to, is not going to be able to stop. And then getting into pull 3 is where it gets pretty wild pretty quickly. There are so many options, so many tech choices and disruption methods that it's going to be very hard to make it to the very end of the game to get the max upside from that location. And so to help with that, we have a couple of ways that we can protect that location. We have our Nightcrawler. That's going to make sure that we don't get hit with any kind of Green Goblin plays or anything major like a Viper or like mirrored version of our deck list. We can protect that lane. And then if we draw into Debris, we can move our Nightcrawler out into those other lanes. We can then drop Debris to flood the opponent's other lanes, and we just start capitalizing and getting a lot more upside out of it. Now this list has a lot of cool play lines, and the original idea was brought to us by one of my Discord members, Guy, who also plays the game very actively. I tweaked some of it from last time, but it's still very, very much a very similar list. You can do something like Hood into a Carnage, or on turn 3 you could do Hood and Viper. That's going to send them the Hood and then a couple of additional Vipers as well to start clogging up their board. You could do the same thing with, you could do a Black Widow and a Carnage. You can do Yondu into a Carnage or Yondu into a Viper, and that's going to send those cards into that lane and start clogging up their side of that location. You can then follow that up with a Debris play to clog up the other locations, and you just have a lot of flexibility with this list in those early game plays. Now, if you don't have one of those play paths, you could protect the lane with your Nightcrawler. You could do Mojo into one of the other lanes that you know is going to be capped out for both you and your opponent because of the Debris play. You can even copy your Green Goblin and send them in that lane, and you just have a lot of disruption in this list, and it performs very, very well, as long as you can get those things to trigger. Now, if the opponent protects their lane with a Nightcrawler, it gets a little bit tougher, but you can still do a couple of cool combinations in your Yondu and your Carnage to make sure that they have very few resources to use. You can do your Black Widow into a Carnage to clog their hand with useless Widow's Bites, and then into a Debris to clog the rest of the board. You just have quite a few options and play paths with this list, so you should always have something to play into Bar Sinister by turn 2 or turn 3. And then the next list that I have is a discard cycle deck list. We all know that the Dracula Lockjaw discard cycle just kind of blew up and performs very, very well. And with this location, that is no different. You can make sure that you discard your Apocalypse at least 4 times by playing Lady Sif into Bar Sinister. You can make sure that that lane is going to be very, very large and continue to buff up your Morbius and your other cards by playing Dracula into Bar Sinister. And then he's going to discard, and then each one of those is going to discard either your Swarm or your Apocalypse, whichever one you have in hand. You can also start your Lockjaw cycle. You just have a lot of flexibility with this list, and it works very, very well. The only downside is that you are going to need to have Bar Sinister clear at least on turn 4 or turn 3 if you play your Lady Sif early, and that's not always going to be easy to do. And so you might end up taking out Sarah and taking in a Nightcrawler so that you can protect that lane, but then you have to worry about it clogging up the rest of your board. This is a good base idea depending on how much disruption you're seeing on the ladder and kind of what the opponent is playing into for Bar Sinister. But if they're not running disruption, this is going to be a very, very strong deck list today. And then lastly, I always try to put some form of kind of counter style deck list. Now, this is one that I showcased a little while back that still performs very, very well even after the patch. The original list ran a Mysterio, but because we don't want it to duplicate the Mysterio token in Bar Sinister, we took that out for a Green Goblin. That's going to be a decent turn 3 play if you can make sure that it goes off. And if not, you can always do something kind of cheeky with dropping a Nova into Bar Sinister, and then later on dropping a Killmonger that will trigger Nova 4 times, and it keeps you protected in that Bar Sinister lane. You can drop your Killmonger on 5 into a turn 6 Arrow or Enchantress, and it just helps protect that lane for a lot longer than you would be able to otherwise. You might also want to take out Bishop today. Bishop is typically going to benefit from playing a lot of cards. With Bar Sinister, that of course takes out 3 additional spaces that you can play. And so if you find that he's not performing very well, you might take him out for something else. You could always do your Nightcrawler. You could put in a couple of other cards that perform well. Typically in a counter style deck list, you can do Captain Marvel, and then you're going to have 4 roving cards that are 6 power roaming across the board. If you can have that lane protected, you could even do a Shuri and a Captain Marvel. There's a lot of flexibility and a lot of tech cards, depending on what Series 4 and Series 5 cards you've pulled. But overall, this one should give you some strong counters to whatever the opponent is playing. If they're playing something that runs a Blue Marvel or an Iron Man, or they're looking for that high roll in Bar Sinister, you can use your Enchantress. If it's a high-powered play, you can clear that lane with Shang-Chi, knowing that you'll swing that lane on that last turn. You can redirect some of their cards on your last turn with Arrow. You just have quite a bit of flexibility in what plays you can make and win. And a couple of other tech cards, I don't have them unlocked, that might serve you well today. You might be able to do some pretty cool things with Shuri into something big into Bar Sinister. You might be able to do some cool things with a Luke Cage into a Hazmat in the Bar Sinister lane. That's going to trigger Hazmat 4 times, and then your cards can't have their power reduced. You might be able to do the Hazmat and Absorbing Man along with your Luke Cage to make sure that it triggers at least 5 times on the opponent's side of the board, and that might be able to swing you the game in several scenarios. You could also use a Valkyrie if you've pulled Valkyrie and the opponent plays into the Bar Sinister lane early and it's a high power play. You can set that to 3, and then if you have a way to push additional power there, like a Mr. Fantastic or a Cerebro, you can push more power over into that lane than the opponent will be able to, and you can kind of sneak out some wins that way as well. But overall, I think this is going to be a very, very interesting day. I hope that these decks kind of give you a good guide in what you can play, and if you run into anything that's very, very strong and I didn't include it here, let me know in the comment section down below. I love hearing and seeing the ways that you adapt this, or see the way that other people adapt this during these featured location days so that I can brew better in the future. But anyways, guys, I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave it a like and a comment down below. As always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.